Welcome to the Gladden Longevity Podcast with Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, MD, FACC, founder and CEO of Gladden Longevity. On this show, we want to answer 3 questions for you. How good can we be? How do we make 100 the new 30? And how do we live well beyond 120? We want to help you optimize your longevity, health, and human performance with impactful and actionable information. Now, here's today's episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast.
Dr. Jeffrey Gladden with the Gladden Longevity Podcast. And, on this podcast, we're really devoted to helping you to live young for a lifetime. There are 4 questions that empower me every day, and they empower this podcast. The first one is, how good can we be? A global question. 1, how do we make 100 the new 30? And that's really having a 30-year-old body and a 300-year-old mind, all the wisdom of a 300-year-old mind and all the youthfulness of a 30-year-old body. And then how do we live well beyond 120? And how do we live young for a lifetime, right? And a lot of that comes down to mindset and how we think about things and how we reprogram our nervous system. So I hope that you're finding this podcast enjoyable. And if you do like it, if you could leave us a review, that'd be very helpful. And if you have any other comments or questions for us, that would be great. If you want to subscribe, that's very helpful to the algorithms for us. So I appreciate that. And today, I just finished a conversation. I'm here solo, bacheloring it today. Steve Ryder's away. And I just had a conversation with a woman, Jodi Scott, who has a background in health psychology and psychoneuroimmunology. And she's become the CEO and co-founder of a company called Sierra Sage Herbs. And they've developed some really, really interesting plant-based skincare products that I wanted you to hear about. And then she's merged her company with another company that's giving them access to some other really interesting things that you're going to want to hear about as well. So I love this conversation with Jodi, and I think you'll appreciate it as well. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, and Steve Ryder is playing hooky again today. I'm not sure where he's at, but that's all good. I will say this, that we're recording this on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, and I've got a birthday coming up in February 28th, and I've decided that I'll be starting a new decade of 27, but I'm also going to see if I can get into the best shape of my life at that point in time. It's not that I'm in bad shape. I'm actually in quite good shape, but there's some things I'd like to work on between now and then. And if any of you want to join me in this project of being in the best shape of your life by the end of February 28th, we'll do some podcasts about the metrics that we're using to measure that, which really kind of falls into the whole category of mosaic of ages, if you will. And I'll delineate many, many things that we measure at Gladden Longevity to actually define where we are in the aging process, and I'll share with you what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and I think you'll find that really, really interesting. We've had a number of people request things like, well, what is Dr. Gladden doing? How is he approaching this, and where is he in the process? So I'm happy to share that information with you. I did have the opportunity to do a radio show a couple of weeks ago, put on by a couple of attorneys that were ostensibly talking about intellectual property, but really they had a number of health-related guests on the show. And one of them is a guest with us today. It's Jodi Scott. And I was actually fascinated with all the guests, 2 of the other guests that were on the show. But Jodi agreed to jump on the podcast, and she's doing some really interesting things with a really interesting background that I thought you would enjoy hearing about. So, Jodi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Gladden. It's great to be here.
Great. So, Jodi, tell us a little bit. I know that you're kind of famous, if you will, for a product called Green Goo, but so the audience understands a little bit of how you got to Green Goo, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? But I know you've got some medical background there and some other interesting things, a master's degree and some interesting things. So let's just chat about that for a minute.
Yeah, it's a sort of a full circle moment in terms of where we are today and where we started. So my sister's a certified herbalist and midwife. And then I
Hmm.
was pre-med and I got my master's in health psychology and had a strong passion for psychoneuroimmunology. So very much how the mind and the body and your immune system works togetder. I actually
So
used to
that's a really,
train.
excuse me, just interrupt you for a second. That's a really interesting topic. You don't really hear people studying psychoimmunology, right? Psychoneuroimmunology. And yet we know that the brain has a massive impact on the immune system. What drew you to that? Was that?
I think one, my own experience. I'm one of those people that I'm incredibly type A, used to love to multitask and push, drive, push, drive. And I would
Hmm.
get sick and I would push and drive. And there
Okay.
was a moment for me, and I was in my undergrad at the time, and I was like, I need to do something different to get over these colds that are just kicking my butt. And I
Hmm.
meditated. I meditated that day, and I literally felt a shift in my immune system and my recovery. And I started being more intentional, not just like, oh, take your vitamin C and take all these different supplements,
Hmm.
but instead really bringing my mindset into the healing process, and it worked. And so at that point, I was just
Cool.
starting to study medicine, and that's when I really dug in deeper with psychology and neuropsychology and how there may be a relationship with your overall physical health.
Yeah, it is fascinating, right? The stress response really suppresses the immune system, the cortisol, and all that. Sympathetic nervous system drive kind of keeps us on the edge, and they're all linked. In fact, there's a test that we do in the office using brain tap, where we hook people up to electrodes, and out of that, we actually not only get the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which is available on many devices, actually, Whoop or Oura Rings or Garmin watches or whatever, Apple watches. But it also gives you a look at the neural hormonal balance of the person. So you can actually see, okay, think of it this way: the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system tell you how stressed you are in the moment. But when you look at that neural hormonal piece, it gives you that sense of how chronically stressed you might be. And so in your case, I bet you were chronically stressed because you were always saddling up and charging into the next fight, so to speak.
You got it.
Right. And so it's interesting. People that do have a meditation practice, people that do step off the gas to recover, they are able to rebuild that neurohormonal base that really supports us and supports the immune system. So it's fascinating that you were able to experience that in just one session of meditation.
Well, it's great to know that we can rebuild too, because that's important. So,
Yeah.
and at the time, it was interesting because I started the first graduate program in health psychology, and there really wasn't any specialty in psychoneuroimmunology. It was kind of like a pop
Hmm.
culture term in the
Okay.
psychology world. And so, I was training resident physicians on the biopsychosocial model, and that was the best step health psychology was taking in terms of looking at the patient, not just from a let's prescribe a medication for your symptom relief, but let's try to, now we call it integrative medicine, but let's look at this from a more holistic perspective. And what social barriers are we identifying that may be contributing to their diabetes or to their, cardiovascular issues and so forth. And so
Hmm.
it really opened up my appetite for looking at alternative modalities.
When I think about that, also, I spent a lot of years in traditional medicine, working in VA hospitals and city hospitals during my training in Denver and Cleveland and places like this, and then doing cardiology work for 25 years. A lot of people seem to be scripted by these stories that they have about themselves that reinforce their drinking habits, their smoking habits, their even their depression or their whatever else it is. So I'm just curious because when you're in that space and you're trying to help someone not only recover from where they are in the hospital or in the clinic, but actually tee them up for success going forward. If we're not changing those stories, we're not really getting there. So I wondered did you come across any sort of novel ways to go about that and help people with that? Because that's kind of a tough nut to crack.
It was, and truly to speak the physician's language, to have them adopt that practice. So I just became
Hmm.
a data statistic junkie,
Okay.
and, bringing data to them and different studies where I could also negate some of the studies. Because what was interesting, you know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, physicians, and you may be able to relate to this, they weren't taking statistic classes.
Hmm.
So you would have a lunch with a pharmaceutical company who would talk to you about this particular medication and say, this is the one. And they would walk you through a study that would be compelling, right? And so there you go, you
Yeah.
adopt this inhaler, and this is now your new thing. And I was fascinated by how much the physicians were not able to discern the different journals and research that was coming out. And so that for me was pivotal in terms of trying to link without, it was very anecdotal, right? Trying to link some behavioral medicine data that was coming out with some of the, more traditional medical journals to say, hey, there's something here.
Hmm. And did that lead to any kind of therapeutic breakthroughs for anybody on the physician side or the clinic side or anything like that? Or was it more just them carrying that consciousness in their brain?
It was still very early in terms of where the resident physicians were in their perspective of wanting to,
Hmm.
explore this. And so, absolutely. I mean, I think they started to see the results. And I think that's why we are where we are today with holistic and integrative medicine, is because we saw the results. We're breaking
Hmm.
barriers of smoking cessation or obesity and saying, hey, let's look at this human and say, what behavior factors are happening at home, what's your culture, what are your habits, and then you would start to see improvements. And I think that
Yeah.
was part of the journey of seeing the evolution of medicine.
Hmm. Cool. Well, very cool. Very cool that you were part of that. So obviously you're not doing that today. So what transpired after that?
Nope. So I was in private practice for a while, and my sister was just finishing herb school, and she, started sharing with me this practice of making topical therapeutics with plants, and this, really unique extraction process that was
Hmm.
really an old time process, but had been, kind of lost over time. And she was really excited about it. And she's like, I'm seeing these results. And so I started taking a look at them, and then and these products were used for things like eczema, psoriasis, wound care, topical analgesics, pain care. So, being the researcher, and having zero, I'm not I don't have an MBA, I don't have any sales experience,
Hmm.
not in consumer packaged goods. And I started looking at the first aid category. And I was like, wow, there has not really been any innovation, for 30, 40 years. And then looking at the data as well, I found that the natural consumer was willing to abandon their natural ethos because they were told things like neosporin, hydrocortisone, calamine were the only products that could get the job done. So here they lived a very clean life. And then you open up their first
Hmm.
aid cabinet, and it was a massive concession, right?
Right.
And the conventional consumer was just generally dissatisfied with what the OTC market had available. Here, the majority of these people seeking these solutions had chronic skin conditions, and most of the
Hmm.
solutions over the counter were really for acute skin conditions. Use this for 4 to 5 days, discontinue if you don't find the results, may cause severe damage, call it liver failure, kidney, the laundry list
Right.
there,
Right.
and go see your physician. And for the conventional consumer, it's just really more inconvenient. I have to go visit the doctor. And I said, then I was looking at, taking it down in sort of the way my mind thinks in this sort of integrative mindset, which is, okay, we have all these tubes that are being thrown in the landfill. There's no sustainability. And there's also, phthalates in these plastic containers. And, to date, phthalates, the US produces 1 billion pounds of phthalates per year and is the number one chemical used across the globe. And yet there's a lot of evidence that it impacts our endocrine system and hormone balance. And so I thought, can we make a plant-based, sustainable solution that is superior in efficacy that's on the market, and change First Aid. And that's where Green Goo was born. So my sister and I went into product development, really optimized these formulas, and started tackling different skin conditions and looking at whether it was a vapor rub, poison ivy, eczema, psoriasis, wound care, and so forth. And that was really the birth until we kind of ventured into other spaces.
Right. So that's interesting. So one of the things I really like about your approach is it is all plant-based, which is good. And I would suspect that you're probably harvesting a variety of plants to put in here. Is that true? It's kind of like a cocktail of plants that go into this?
Yeah. You got it. And in the early days, we actually used to grow the herbs ourselves and then take it through this, long extraction process that kind of was the sun and the moon cycle. Obviously, that's not a scalable concept. And so it was difficult for us to find a manufacturer, and we wanted an FDA certified facility because we wanted the credibility that these products were going to bring solutions. And I really attribute our dry skin formula to putting us on the map and getting a manufacturer. And this product is for eczema and psoriasis, chronic dry skin. And we were at a trade show, and this guy came by our booth, and he was selling us lanyards and promotional products that you sell when you're a company and you want to go and promote. They were not a traditional manufacturer. And he shared with us that his son had eczema. So I said, well, here, see if this works. We're seeing some good results. And he called me a week later and he said, I don't know how we're going to scale this product, but the world needs this. And you've got my attention. And to this date, we have a dedicated line, a dedicated team, and we built this unique extraction process. So what's incredibly different is it's like we're compounding from plants. We bring the plants to our manufacturing facility. We take them through this very slow and high extraction process that protects the integrity of the plant. So you get the cannabinoid profile, the botanical profile, the terpenes, the chlorophyll, and a unique blend of those oils go in each of these products. So it's not something that you find every day. It's pretty great.
So how did you come up with the different formulations that this is for eczema and this is for something else and whatever? How did you figure that out? Is that just empirically trying stuff, or were there animals involved, or what happened?
Well, we're cruelty-free. So good news is we weren't testing on animals, which is unique to the OTC space.
Right.
It's twofold. So one, my sister being a certified herbalist, having gone through the education and that information platform. As well, the FDA now recognizes a certain amount of herbs as having active ingredients. Now, my sister being the herbalist would argue there are more herbs in our products that are right now on the label as inactive ingredients that very much deserve an active ingredient call out, but the FDA isn't there yet. So we can only call out the herbs that the FDA specifically recognizes, and we can only call it out in the same vein that the FDA recognizes it. So, for example, if calendula is identified as an antiseptic, we can only call it an antiseptic, even though it has other, in the herbalist world, more medicinal
other properties, other effects. One of the things that I've seen with some other herbal compounds is that people try to refine it down to the quote unquote active compounds. But my feeling is that biology is complex, and sometimes the ones that are felt to be less active are actually required for the active piece to be really active. So it's complex. I think you want to try to have, it's almost like a whole plant concept, right? Where you have lots of different things, some of which are carrying the load, but other things are kind of in a supportive role, and you may not fully understand exactly what they're doing, but if you take them away, you get a different kind of result.
You're 100% correct. And that's a great example of how these plants work synergistically together. For example, like plantain, we call that the nature's Band-Aid, if you will. And it's wonderful for being an antimicrobial, antiseptic component. It also brings hydration. But what's really great is it also has a coagulant component to it. And when you put that and pair it with yarrow, the two of them can work well together to slow down the bleeding and increase the oxygen to the wound site to improve the healing. And so
Was
they
that
work really well
plantain? Did you
together.
say plantain? As in
Plantain. Yep.
plantain. Okay, so plantain and yarrow. Yeah, it's fascinating how these things work together like that. And you know that ancient cultures had to have access to this. They must have figured a lot of this out, right? So they had pretty powerful medicines, I'm sure.
It's really bringing an old world concept that has been tried and true, but sort of lost in time. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, the Industrial Revolution was a great time in our history where we could bring large volumes of products to people's stores and therefore homes.
Right.
And it required preservatives. It required a process because we didn't have the transportation technology that we have today. But it
Mm-hmm.
really does lend an opportunity for us now to be able to bring these, really clean products to the consumer because we can get them to you in such a quick process that you don't. And honestly, I mean, you look at things like, parabens, for example, which is a mold reducer. It's used as a preservative.
Mm-hmm.
And there are natural preservatives like rosemary, lavender, vitamin E. And so, you don't need something to last 5 years either anymore because we can
Right.
get it to you, within a few
Right.
months. And so it's a great opportunity to have some cleaner products in your home.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, in the pharma model, it's a kind of a reductionist model where you're trying to get down to a molecule and see what that molecule will do. And that's called the purity of science, where we're going to test this one molecule and see what it does. One of the reasons they do that is to basically find something that's patentable. And I'm just curious in your world if these combinations of plants that you're putting together have enabled you to create patents around anything.
Well, not to date. So we've
Okay.
kept our process and our blends sort of a trade secret,
Okay.
and also limited resources. We're a family
Yeah.
grown mother, daughter, sister started this company together. You talk about where are you in 12 months if you could dream a project.
Mm-hmm.
If I could have the funding to work with groups to be able to really isolate those compounds, to your point,
Mm-hmm.
more so, I mean, wonderful if we could patent, but more so really to be able to improve the delivery. Because if we're seeing
Sure.
these results like this, imagine what we could do if we
Sure.
understood these plant compounds. And,
Mm-hmm.
to my earlier point, the FDA is starting to invest more time and energy in this arena. I definitely attribute the cannabis market to improving sort of this plant renaissance and looking at
Mm-hmm.
other plants as having medicinal properties. But we're really early in that knowledge arena of what these plants can do.
This episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast is brought to you by H2 Molecular Hydrogen in the Gladden Longevity Store.
Yeah, Steve, you've heard us talk about this numerous times on the podcast in terms of the benefits of H2 and hydrogen water. We love it. It's really the best way to balance your entire redox system. So it really protects you from free radical damage. I take it every time I get on a flight to protect me from radiation damage when I'm flying. And I use it to rejuvenate my brain in the afternoon. There's really two kinds of exercise. There's physical exercise, and taking H2 before or after that works great. But also there's mental exercise. And I find that the H2 will bring your brain back when you're tired in the afternoon. So I think it's like the perfect thing for longevity and for performance, quite honestly.
And I talked to you about this, that I found dropping 1 or 2 tablets in a glass of water right before bed. I've seen an overall bump in my deep sleep when I do so. And
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you click on the store tab when you visit GladdenLongevityShop.com and use the promo code podcast10, you'll get 10% off your order. And this code isn't only good for our H2 product, but it's also good for all the supplements we carry. So podcast10 at the GladdenLongevityShop.com.
Yeah, one of the other things that I use it for routinely is when I'm about to go on a mountain bike ride. And I will say this, that if I go on a long mountain bike ride, I will take one prior, I'll take one during, and I'll take one after. And some of the Ironmen that we've worked with have said that when they're doing an Ironman, they'll take it 3 or 4 times throughout the race, and they're Their comment is that it's like taking out the old battery and putting in a new one. It really rejuvenates your body's ability to perform when you're doing more extended athletic activity. So think about that too. If you want to go do a longer hike or whatever else, take it with you.
So GladdenLongevityShop.com, enter podcast 10 for 10% off your order.
H2 molecular hydrogen. It's low-hanging fruit on your quest to make 100 the new 30. One of the interesting things that you said early on, and that got discussed on that radio show that we did together, was this idea of being in the emergency space, if you will, kind of the acute care space in the pharmacies. And if I'm not mistaken, the first aid space, you're actually in the first aid aisles of typical pharmacies, right? Like Walgreens, CVS, things like that. Is that correct?
We are. Yep.
Yeah.
And we started, go ahead. You go first.
I was just going to say, for the audience, if you're listening to this and you'd like to try some of these products for you or somebody you know that's struggling with a skin issue or an acute problem, you can find these in, and I'm sure that you can probably find it in their online stores as well for like Walgreens and CVS, Green Goo. So pretty interesting. Yeah.
In the early days, so back to your first aid and emergency care practices, when we were first really starting to understand the possibilities with these products, we started working with like World Vision and the military and remote emergency medical care practices.
Right.
Because in these areas, wound care is the number one issue.
Sure.
And it cannibalizes other medical interventions. Yep. Along with, you end up carrying this enormous backpack. One of the observations my sister made, she went over to the Philippines after the typhoon to help birth babies. And, she's going into these remote locations with these huge duffel bags. And when she gets to this location, she's like, oh, if only I could have carried less and brought this woman food who has preeclampsia, right, I would have served her better. And so we started taking the first aid product out there because it's not just a topical antibiotic. It is your first aid kit in one little tin. So it's an incredibly compact resource for you to take in these remote locations. And then you can start addressing other medical conditions, which was pretty fun.
I should probably mountain bike with one.
Yes. We've got some great stories of people who used to shove dirt in their, they get hurt and they're out in a remote area. They shove dirt in just so they can, make it out. And instead they've got their goo with them and they stick it in their huge gash and then end up with, 18 stitches when they get back.
Yeah. Interesting. No, this is good. We've had some success too with things like ozonated olive oil and other oils having a medicinal property as well that are pretty nice. It sounds like this is coming at it from an additional standpoint of all these other plant components, where that's really kind of relying on the ozonation of the oil to create some of the healing effects that ozone can. But I would suspect that those two together would actually be probably of some value. I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
Well, I think you're spot on just in terms of increasing the oxygen, the hydration, and those oils are very likable by the body, right? The semi-permeable membrane versus like a paraben or petroleum that sits on the surface of the skin. Right. So those oils are great transporters for bringing in those medicinal properties and actually getting it through the various layers of your skin and being able to serve your body more systemically. And I love, after our visit that we had a couple of weeks ago, it's been really interesting getting to know the telomere relationship in your skin and that there's a potential relationship where there's a significant amount of potential enzyme production that takes place in your epidermis that helps regenerate your telomeres. And perhaps, we are just getting to know the opportunities of our skin and longevity, because there seems to be a real relationship there were some studies that came out. I think the first one was in 2016, British Journal of Dermatology. And the first time that they recognized that there was a relationship between mindset and psoriasis and eczema. And they were actually able to look at certain meditation practices and how that may impact wound care. And then fast forward, there's a number of studies that have come out since then. And there's this longevity component that lives in our skin that has a mind connection that can also be facilitated through plant nutrition, hydration, and we go to sleep and different components of what you're practicing. There's something interesting here that I want to spend more time
Yeah.
on just in my own research and knowledge.
Well, it is interesting. There are ways to measure the youthfulness of skin, based on the elasticity of the skin, what the skin trigger is, it's called, when you pull up on it, how strong it is, the thickness of the skin, obviously wrinkles and things like that. The thinning of the skin tends to happen, right? Hair follicles tend to go away, things like that. So there's lots of metric of skin aging, and some of those can be reversed with re-lengthening telomeres, like regrowing hair and doing some other things, right? So in my case, that's not really what I'm going for, but there is data all around that. So yeah, the telomeres do play a role. Do you have any kind of a sunscreen or anything like that you utilize?
We do. So we have a product called Solar Goo, and it's made with
Okay.
only 7 ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of the plants and plant oils was specifically designed to offer sun protection. So
Okay.
there's calendula flower in there, coconut oil, rosemary. And it's very interesting when you start looking at some of the SPF properties that are in plants that can contribute to giving you sun protection while also offering further nutrition to your skin, antioxidant,
Mm-hmm.
preventing free radicals, more oxygen to your skin. So not only are you protecting yourself from the sun, but you're also nourishing it. And then you're also, I mean, when you look at, I remember being in my organic chemistry class and we were looking at the benzo ring and I raised my hand and I said, isn't that a known carcinogen? And the oxybenzone ring. And he was like, yep. And I'm like, and we're putting it in our sunscreen? Yep. But it works, it gets rid of, deflects or whatever the radiation. But it's terrifying to think that we're putting different ingredients on us that then go into the water. So, our
Mm-hmm.
coral reef and the water system
Sure.
that then goes into the food. So thinking up from that perspective, I think is important as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. There's a product out there too. I don't know if you've heard of this, called HelioCare, that's made from a fern called Polypodium leucotomus. HelioCare, HELIO care. We did a podcast on it, and it's actually quite remarkable. It has only an SPF of 5, but if you give it to people that are fair skinned, they can go out in the sun. It's a pill that you take, and it really decreases the rate of people getting burnt. And if you combine it with a topical sunscreen like you're talking about, all of a sudden you have a really potent way for people with fair skins to go out and ski or be at the beach or whatever and not really suffer all the skin damage, which is pretty cool. And it's been used in people that have active squamous cell and basal cell carcinoma with resolution of those cancers, and it prevents skin cancers of all types. So it's a pretty fascinating product. I'm thinking about this because I think for the audience, sometimes layering together these different technologies gets you everything that you want, right? So that's kind of cool. So you've kind of just went through a merger of some sort. Is that correct? You're in the middle of doing something at the corporate level. You're now the CEO, even though you don't have an MBA, you're the CEO, which is fine. I'm sure you're doing a great job. So tell us a little bit about that. Why did you go into the merger? What is it that you're expecting to come of it? What areas are you moving into? There's some pretty interesting things there, I think.
Yeah, I think for us, when you look at, on the consumer packaged goods side, there's sort of a traditional trajectory. You grow your company and then you have an acquisition by, a major strategic that's in that space. And for us, we knew our mission wasn't done. And our vision and our marriage with these plants was really important to us. And we wanted to be able to do more of what we're doing without having the limited resources in doing so, and also be with like-minded folks. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know, kind of going back to when I started in health psychology, I love to challenge the way we think and see if we can improve upon it. And so we found this group and out of Australia that was very focused on plant-based medicine and alternative modalities.
Mm-hmm.
So there's cannabis in the portfolio. There's psychedelics. We have it's called Hallucinex Life Sciences out of Nova Scotia. And it is a clinical trial looking at psilocybin as a resource for treatment-resistant PTSD in vets and our service folks. And my
Nice.
dad's retired military. I grew up in the military. This is
Mm-hmm.
an incredibly passionate sector for me, and
Mm-hmm.
a very underserved community. And it's not necessarily that we haven't been putting resources behind trying to help this population. It's that we haven't found anything that is as significant and as impactful as we are seeing with psilocybin.
Mm-hmm.
People come in with, obviously the patient profile for the trial is the treatment resistant PTSD, but they're coming in for anxiety and obesity and drug abuse and insomnia, and their social life is just destroyed and suicidal. And so what I love so much about this is that after a microdose and the first macro dose, we're seeing 80% remission in the treatment
Mm-hmm.
resistant PTSD, along with they now are reading books and going to concerts and losing weight and making
Mm-hmm.
healthy habits and decisions and having relationships and sleeping.
Yeah.
um, I just think there's something really special here that
Yeah. Agreed.
is coming.
What it boils down to for us is reprogramming the nervous system, right? I think all of health, quite honestly, ultimately comes down to reprogramming the nervous system. If it's how you move, how you think, how your brain is operating in the background, your default mode networks. I think if we can reprogram the brain into more healthy, expansive ways of being, it just opens up all kinds of possibilities for the individual to thrive, right? So I think utilizing psychedelics in that sense can be super helpful for people. There's a lot of data on it. I'm just curious a little bit about the trial. So the company's in Nova Scotia, but they're running a trial that's in the U.S. under a U.S. IRB or
It is
Canadian
in
or
Nova Scotia, so it is
okay,
in Canada. And then
okay,
our goal will be when we're in phase 2, when we're done with phase 3, that we'll be able to bring that data to the US and be able to integrate it somehow in our VA and military by
nice.
leveraging that data. Yeah.
So I'm curious about the psilocybin. Are they using a particular strain of mushrooms to get it, or are they isolating the molecule itself, or what's actually happening there?
So we've done a little bit of both in the early stages. And what we recognized is that we needed to isolate the psilocybin, so psilocin, and
Yeah,
create a pharmaceutical grade consistent delivery system,
right.
in sort of an aqueous, therefore, from a digestive perspective,
Hmm.
we've got consistent bioavailability.
So is it just it's isolated psilocin that the people are taking basically? Okay,
Yes.
yeah. I think this kind of has to be done when you're trying to do trials like this because you have to know what dose of, the psilocin that somebody's getting. But then there's also this question of, various strains of mushrooms have different effects and different intensities. And there's obviously other factors in the plant that I think are influencing the experiences that people have. So it's just impossible, I think, to
100%.
try to do a study on that because it's too complex in a way. Um,
I think to your point, we're going to have to take it in small bites, because when you look at the neuroplasticity, I'm sure you've seen brain scans, and
mhm.
it's really challenging how we look at the mind pain loop, we'll call it, and trauma. In order for us to really isolate different aspects of it, we're going to have to do small bites like that. Now, I think
Yeah,
the anecdotal research is strong. There's
yeah,
plenty of that. I think we're going to find that, to your point, different strains have different impacts. And we're already starting to see certain strains just in keeping up with the data, particular strains that are good for weight loss, particular strains, anorexia, and here we're talking about two different, ends
yeah,
of the spectrum. And I think that's going to be seen more, we'll call it, in the recreational side,
hmm
as more opportunities and funding come into play to be able to
hmm
spend more time with this research. But coming from a health psychology background, we've just never seen results like this. Phantom limb. I
yeah,
mean,
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
No, it is fascinating. People can have truly transformative experiences, like life-changing experiences. And there's a lot of really interesting data in cancer patients actually getting completely different perspective on life and what it means, and how grateful they are to be here, and you're kind of getting to that transcendent point, right? Which is like a really cool place to be. So that's very interesting. So in your company, you've kind of merged into this bigger company, which is doing those things. But I take it that you're looking for them to kind of help you do the funding to kind of go down your own path. Is that a true statement, or are you looking to merge into some of these other paths as well?
I think that there are parallels in what we're doing where we can support each other that are synergistic,
Mm-hmm.
but they're also very different lanes.
Okay.
We're consumer packaged goods, and we don't have cannabis in our products, but we
Sure.
very much support the research that we're finding in cannabis and the
Mm-hmm.
opportunities that are there, and the same with psilocybin. Now, living
Sure.
in Colorado, we're seeing massive inroads here on the
Sure.
psychedelic component. And, to your point of end of life, there's more end of life doulas exploring psychedelics and so on. And so I want to stay, and I think it cultivates what we're doing at Green Goo, for example. We just developed a gratitude app, and this app is taking a holistic approach to your skincare because, when we were talking earlier about mindfulness, gratitude is a form of mindfulness. And there's, plenty of data that shows that by practicing gratitude, you improve your overall health and wellness, you reduce your anxiety, you improve your healthy habits, and you improve your curiosity. And those in turn are mindful practices that we're seeing that impact your skin health and your
Mm-hmm.
overall health. And I love what you're doing. I can't wait to start working with you over it
Yeah.
on your longevity practices, because I think I'm gonna learn so much about myself and
Yeah.
also what I'm doing with skincare and this sort of holistic journey
Mm-hmm.
that we hope to invite to more folks.
Yeah. Just so that you understand, Jody is looking at joining Gladden Longevity as a client. And so we'll have an opportunity to kind of do a deep dive for her in the way that we do, kind of unravel all the knots for everybody. And I think you're going to find it completely fascinating, quite honestly, to be able to characterize where you are and how we can help you move forward, towards really this concept of the 30-year-old body and the 300 or 3,000-year-old mind, right? Which is kind of what we're talking about here. So very, very cool stuff. I had another thought about the Green Goo products, which is that if they're that effective in the skin, I wonder, do you have anything that people actually swallow? And have you done anything with gut health or leaky gut or any of that sort of thing? Or is that kind of off limits for you guys?
We haven't done anything specifically with leaky gut, but we are starting to look at, to your point, gut health obviously is very much connected to our overall
Right.
homeostasis and even mental health.
Yep.
And we have a couple projects in the queue we call, in terms of nutraceutical concepts that
Mm-hmm.
bring a holistic approach while also incorporating gut health. My daughter's 12, so an area that I'm very passionate about right now too is just
Mm-hmm.
women's health, and women's health starting at a young age, going all the way, through menopause. And what
Yeah.
else can we be doing? Because that's a very physiological and psychological experience. And yet
Mm-hmm.
you see it in your skin. It changes your mind and and then add to it, it's a very real physiological change.
Yeah.
So we're looking more at how we can bring our plant knowledge into that space.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot in that space, but there's also a lot of need in that space, quite honestly. And with the success that you've had with the skin, I would encourage you to kind of go down these other paths because I think you'll probably make a real contribution there. So that's very, very cool.
Thank you. I appreciate the encouragement.
Yeah. Well, Jody, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Appreciate you coming on the show here. And where can people find you? Where do they go to learn more?
The best place to go would be greengoo.com.
Okay.
There you can find all of the products. We have a sexual wellness brand called Southern Butter. There you can see and explore all the products and get to know us and the education around them. Of course, they're available on Amazon and then also your pharmacies and grocery stores.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been fun. Always learn something new when I'm with you. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Likewise.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. If you would like more information on what we've discussed or other topics, please reference the show notes or go to gladdenlongevitypodcast.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by searching Gladden Longevity. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to get future episodes delivered to you and share our podcast or this episode with someone in your life that you may find benefit. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another exciting episode. The Gladden Longevity Podcast is provided for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The use of any information and materials linked to this podcast is at the listener's own risk.